Welcome to The Line. Last week, President Trump ordered the Pentagon to send National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to help patrol the area and address illegal immigration and drug trafficking. Now, this week, Governor Martinez's office announced that 80 New Mexico National Guard soldiers are headed to the border and that eventually 250 soldiers will serve in that operation. President Trump says the move to send the National Guard is necessary to deal with an expected uptick in illegal border activity. Critics, on the other hand, say it's a waste of money and resources. So here to talk about this and other topics of the week, our Line panelists include attorney Sophie Martin. Albuquerque Journal reporter Dan McKay is back with us. Former House Minority Whip Daniel Foley is here. And Laura Sanchez-Rivey, she's an attorney at Cuddy and McCarthy LLP. You know, Dan Foley, we have had troops at the border in our state before. This is not a new thing, but in the context of where we are right now, is this a necessary move in your view? Do we need troops at the border, and how many do we need?
So I think we've consistently had troops at the border in New Mexico. I think it's been a constant partnership.
Yep.
And yeah, to some extent we do. I mean, the border in New Mexico is in some of the most remote areas to get to. You know, I mean, you send a border patrol guy, well, you head him down towards Palomas.
Right.
I mean, just to get from Deming to Palomas is an hour drive. Mm-hmm. You know, you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Good point.
So I do think that, you know, with the uptick in the border activity, I think for safety reasons, I think for...
Do you buy into the uptick theorem? Do you think there's an uptick either happening or
there is.
coming?
There is, and the reason there is because there's this talk that the border wall is going to get built, so people are trying to say, okay, we want to get done before, we want to get across before something happens, is what the theory is.
Gotcha.
And there's been a historical show that every time there's a move to do this, there is an uptick in that. I think that, you know, clearly outlining what their jobs are, you know, I think asking, you know, National Guard troops to start apprehending border crossers is a bad idea, and clearly they're not doing that. But I think sending them out, I think it's a great training opportunity. I mean, you know, a lot of these folks are left with, you know, coming into Albuquerque for weekend drill, and they're, you know, fixing the vehicles and doing stuff here. You can go down to the border. They can work on, you know, patrolling and surveillance and doing the things that a lot of them are going to have to do should they be deployed. So, you know, but I think we've had a long history of working with the Border Patrol and with Homeland Security in New Mexico, and it's going to be interesting because, you know, clearly the folks with the Border Patrol are asking for the help. They're saying that they need it. Most of the states, including Arizona, which I believe is a Democrat governor right now, has said, "Look, this is not a partisan issue. It's not a Republican.
It's Republican.
Yeah, it's not a partisan issue." So,
well, there's Jerry Brown. He has a different opinion on these things too. In
so do the hundreds of thousands of people exiting California every year.
Well, there you go, Sophie.
Yes.
Senator Udall made an interesting point that most illegal drug activity is actually port of entry. It's not a border, but in fact, we do have people still bringing marijuana and other things, and heroin across and cocaine across the border. I ask again, is this a reasonable, you know, situation we have here? Because New Mexico, to hear others, or maybe Dan would agree with this, it's a fairly porous situation. Do we in fact need something tightened, and is this the best way to do it?
Well, I mean, I think Dan makes a relevant point, which is that much of the border between New Mexico and Arizona is inaccessible, and so an especially challenging environment if someone is trying to bring people or illegal goods across. An interesting point is going to be something like one member of the personnel for every 6 miles, something like that. So that's I don't know about that. The thing that I think is interesting, though, is if we roll back just a little bit to the discussion of the wall itself and proposals to the wall, we hear border law enforcement saying, listen, a bricks and mortar wall is not that effective for us. We need technology.
That's right.
We need resources like that. And there's also been a call for resources to help with the opioid crisis in the U.S., with other drug issues in the U.S., essentially, when we get to the drug issue, to try to kill the demand element, because that may be more effective than trying to patrol every last mile of that border.
That's right. We'll talk about fence versus wall here in a quick second, too. But Dan, I have a question for you. You know, interesting in the reporting, in 2017, as I'm looking at this, the Border Patrol agents in the El Paso sector apprehended, this is 2017 fiscal, 25,193 people crossing the border, 34,000 plus pounds of marijuana and 140 pounds of cocaine. 25,000 people, that's no small number. That would freak out a lot of Americans if they, you see what I'm getting at here? There's got to be something here that addresses that I think folks are trying to get at here. What's your sense of how this is working so far?
I think one of the most interesting things to me about what happened this week in terms of sending troops to the border is that even Republicans have expressed some concern about how these people will be deployed. Steve Pierce mentioned that he doesn't necessarily see border security as a particularly a staffing problem,
Right.
and that the use of these troops and their effectiveness really depends on how they're deployed. So I'm interested to see how that plays out.
Exactly right. We had Attorney General Sessions in town here in Albuquerque for a meeting, but then also he addressed some border sheriff's departments down there. And to pick up on what Dan said, a couple of the comments from that meeting said, we could use more technology rather than more, troops on the ground, or we don't see this as big a crisis as Washington does. Is there a disconnect here between people on the ground here in New Mexico and where Washington thinks the problem is?
Well, I think there's a major disconnect not only between here and Washington, but even here, Albuquerque, and down south. I mean,
Right.
if you spend time down there, it's no different now than it has been for years. I grew up in Deming, as everybody knows, and I lived there at the time when there were raids going on,
Right.
drug-related issues, U.S. Attorney's Office. There were all kinds of. Drugs have been a huge part of that. So to somehow, of that area for a long time, to say that somehow there's been a major surge recently, I think is a political ploy. And I think it's along the lines of the administration trying to justify the move towards additional, this border wall issue. It's a smoke and mirrors sort of thing. I really don't see that it's suddenly has become that much of an issue more recently, or that there's been increased problems. If you spend time down there, you see Border Patrol agents all the time, and it in some ways can feel like a militarized zone already.
Right.
That you don't see that here. You just don't see folks in Border Patrol agent cars and people in uniform and all of that. It's just a very different culture down there.
Right.
And I think that it's something that people in that part of the state live with on a daily basis. So I'm not surprised to hear that the border sheriffs, and it's a border sheriffs coalition, which is made up of sheriff's departments in multiple states within 25 miles of the border. So they weren't just assembled for this purpose. They're already an existing coalition. And I think that they're the people that should be listened to, not the people that are sitting in Washington or who live in Trump Tower, who have never, experienced life in this part of the state and in this region. I think their concerns about technology are real. There are limitations in terms of what people, actual manpower can do. And we're talking about being able to do things with technology much more efficiently and cost effectively. And I think that that's something that this administration is not, technology and putting money into that doesn't necessarily get the headlines the way sending a surge of troops do.
That's right.
So that's
Good point.
If I could
Yeah.
I'm
Please.
agreeing with Laura, and I also think, the Washington Post this week came out with a description, reported on a description of what these National Guard troops will be doing. They'll be manning drones, so there will be some technology that's in play there, but they'll also be clearing brush, performing facilities maintenance, things like that, that I think, really, do you need trained National Guards people to do that? I mean, the report also says that it's unlikely that they will be armed, that they'll be carrying weapons, and they certainly, to Dan's point, won't be arresting anyone. Was it necessary to send a troop of, a whole huge group of National Guards people, or did they actually need a different kind of worker there? Well, and the federal government can say we've sent a bunch of soldiers as opposed to we've sent a bunch of custodial workers. I think it probably sounds better. But some of what they're having them do sounds like custodial work.
But I think it's also important to remember that that's their job.
Okay.
Right? When they deploy, when we went to Somalia, people have to cook, people have to build roads, people have
water.
You
They
have
don't get to
jobs.
choose what
Right.
their
You
job
have
is.
jobs.
That's true.
So that's why I said earlier that I think you're going to see a lot of these folks, and we have a lot of maintenance stuff in New Mexico. We have a lot of there's a word for it, but they're ancillary guys to we're not full of the
support, essentially.
support elements, and so getting them out there to do that job, it's a great opportunity. Look, if you worked for the Seabees in the Navy and your job was to build a road, you just don't run around on the weekend and build a road, right? When they go to do their weekend training, they go build the same road over and over again. If you tell those guys, hey, we're going to send you away for 3 months for your summer training, and you're going to get to go build 180 miles worth of roads down by the border, they're excited about that. It's real world experience.
Should that be something that 50 to 60 APD officers should be doing instead of patrolling the streets of Albuquerque? What's your sense of?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely
should there be an
insane to send
exemption?
officers from
Okay.
Albuquerque. I'm not saying we don't need officers because, again, as we talked about earlier, we have different jobs, right? We're sending the National Guard guys down there with 0 arrest powers. So if you're talking about trying to capture people and arrest them, then you got to do that with people that have the ability to do that. I'm just not sure how anybody in the city of Albuquerque, first of all, could think it's a good idea to send cops when we've been talking for months we don't have enough. And more importantly, I don't know how anybody with the reputation that they've had would say, yeah, send those guys down here. We want to have them. We want to have them out in the woods, walking around, grabbing people.
That might be a little unfair. Hang on a quick second. Dan, let me ask you this. We're talking about the lowest number since 1971, for border crossings. And, it defies gravity to think that we need all this kind of activity, but at the same time, we've got this idea of a wall versus a fence. And how do we cut that distinction? Is it just a political ploy to say we've done something, but it's just a car barrier, whatever those things are called? You've seen them.
The bollards,
The
is that what you're
bollards,
referring
right.
to? Yes.
You see what I'm getting at here? It really becomes difficult for folks to kind of square this in their minds, these low numbers versus all this activity.
Yeah, well, I think in politics, symbols are important. People spend a lot of time debating things that are often carry meaning outside of, precisely their practical impact. In this case, one of my colleagues, Angela Kacherga, did some really interesting reporting, and she pointed out that what's planned to be built is now called a wall, but it was previously called a fence by the federal authorities. So you're definitely seeing some shifting language around this debate, which is interesting in itself.
It's a lot of territory, so one can't be blamed if they need to get something up. A fence is easier to get off the ground than a wall, for gosh sake. But then, Sophie, it begs the point, how effective is all this going to be? If it's just car barriers, what are we really saying here?
I've been to see the bollards outside of San Diego. I have been there. You don't just slip through between them. They're not, person width. They don't really even appear to be child width. And there are always concerns, frankly, about the environmental impact of a full-on wall.
Right.
Migrating species are not typically able to get past a wall. Some may be able to get past the bollards. And by migrating species, I mean birds, squirrels, animals. I don't mean human beings. They're pretty substantial. It's not like a picket fence. It's not chain link like you see. At least those bollard walls, bollard fences, are pretty substantial. You see other parts of the border down there that are like pieces of sheet metal that have been tacked to posts.
Right.
There's a real sort of hodgepodge down there, and
They used a lot of former runway, Vietnam era runway in San Diego. When I was in the Marines,
looks
they
like
started
it, yeah.
putting it up where they put big metal posts in and then took that old metal runway and would just, and they would literally go in and cut it in big spikes. I mean, it wasn't very friendly. I mean, it was not going to be if you got cut on that stuff, you were going to catch something.
Well, we'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting process. The Attorney General visiting certainly amped this conversation up, but let's see where it goes from here. When we come back to the line, we'll look at money and other recent news about political campaigns.